If only I could get to 0.1 Bitcoin, right? It used to be 10 Bitcoin, then it became 1 Bitcoin, now 0.1 Bitcoin. What does that tell you? Like, at some point, people are going to be like, if only I had 0.01 Bitcoin, if only I had 100,000 sats or something like that. It's always, you don't know what the future holds.
레버리지 땡겨! 마이너스 투자 땡겨! 해가지고 비트코인 먼저 사놔야지.
Do you know why money effect or everything?
I mean, you're saying about the saving the money as a Bitcoin is really good idea, but how do you think of the investment as a Bitcoin to use?
이런 비트코인 씬에서 여러 스타트업들을 많이 봤을 거잖아요. 근데 제가 혹시 놓치고 있는 부분이 있는지, 그리고 이런 비트코인 스타트업들이 망하는 이유, 약간 잘 안 되는 이유가 어떤 건지 좀.
피아트가 결국 이유구나라는 걸 이해하면은 모든 부분이 다 공감이 되더라고요.
But, if you want to ask me, I think you should pray.
여러분, 지미송 마지막 2탄입니다. 이번 영상은 지미송의 비트코인에 대한 솔직한 이야기를 들을 수 있으니 놓치지 마시고요. 지미송의 1편 영상을 보고 오시면 이해가 더 편하니 우측 상단 카드를 눌러 1편을 얼른 보고 오세요. 그럼 바로 들어갑니다. 함께 가시죠. 렛츠고!
그래서 지금 홀리시드 한국의 비트코인 생태계는 집 팔 비사, 집을 팔아서 비트코인 사자. 대출 비사, 대출 땡겨서 레버리지 땡겨, 마이너스 투자 땡겨 해가지고 비트코인 먼저 사놔야지 그냥 조금씩 내 월급에서 얼만큼 이렇게 모아가지고 비트코인을 사면은 도대체 0.1 비트코인 안 된다. 홀코인은 절대 될 수가 없다. 라고 하는 게 이제 그 한국의 비트코인 생태계의 지금 약간 컬처가 돼버렸거든요. 근데 이제 그런데 우리 크리스천 비트코이너들은 여러분들 땡스 갓 포 비트코인 책 읽어보신 분들 아시겠지만 오빠가 주구장창 얘기하시는 게 여러분 빚지지 마세요. 대출하지 마세요. 은행에 대출을 하는 그 순간 우리가 통화량 발행하는 데 기여하게 되는 거예요. 그래서 절대 하지 마세요라고 얘기를 하셨는데 한국 분들은 너무 스마트 하셔가지고 어떻게든 비트코인을 하나라도 더 모으고 싶어서 대출 비사를 한다. 근데 이 부분에서 저희가 이 땡스 갓 포 비트코인 책을 사랑하는 우리 크리스천 비트코이너들은 세계관이 두 개가 부딪히잖아요. 그래서 이거를 어떻게 생각하십니까?
Yeah, I think that's pretty accurate. Yeah, all right, so I would say something a little different if it was like an hour and a half from now, but because you guys are Christians, let me just put it this way: if you're thinking about money that much, what are you worshiping? Right? What are you worshiping? What are you worshiping? Because what Christ tells us is that He will take care of us. And if you are thinking, well, I need to do this to take care of my family. I need to do this so that I can take care of my kids. I need to do this so that my future is secure. You are putting your trust in money. You are putting your trust in money. And Christ is very specific about this, that you cannot serve both money and God. And this is something that's a little uncomfortable for a lot of people to recognize, but I put this in Thank God for Bitcoin and many other places, but I asked this to people at church. Hey, you just got married, when are you going to have a kid? And they said, well, I can't afford it right now. Okay, what are you telling me then? That if you made enough money, that the money would be taking care of the kid? Money doesn't take care of kids. You take care of the kid, right? Right? God takes care of the kid. If you're waiting for money to go make a life decision, you are worshiping money, right? And in many ways, I think that's the mentality that a lot of people get into. This is what this is kind of similar to like fish swimming in water. They don't even know what water is because they're swimming in it. This is like such a pervasive mentality. We've forgotten what it means to serve Christ. It means putting Christ first and doing what He says. Don't worry about what the world's telling you that you need. You don't need an apartment and a very good job and all this other stuff. He says, go be fruitful and multiply. If you're in a marriage, I think you go and have kids. That's completely normal. That's God's design for marriage. For you to wait until you have money means that you're serving the money. Now, with respect to, trying to accumulate a certain amount, again, you're trusting in something other than God, right? If only I could get to 0.1 Bitcoin, right? It used to be 10 Bitcoin, then it became 1 Bitcoin, now it's 0.1 Bitcoin. What does that tell you? Like, at some point, people are going to be like, if only I had 0.01 Bitcoin, if only I had 100,000 sats or something like that. It's always, you don't know what the future holds, and you don't know how much is going to be enough. This is just to calm your anxiety about the future, right? Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything, through prayer and petition, send your request to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will give you peace. Right? That's how you get peace, is by trusting in God and not trusting in what the money is supposed to provide for you.
네, 결국 그 돈을 우상 숭배하지 말라 하는 말씀이고, 네, 결국 그 빚을 내서 비트코인을 먼저 산다라고 하는 거에 있어서. 역시나 그 비트코인이 우리 인생을 책임져 주는 것이 아니라 정말 하나님께서 우리를 책임져 주시는 거고, 비트코인은 그냥 우리 생활에 필요한 진짜 그냥 돈, 그냥 그 자체인 거니까 그런 부분에 있어서 좀 명확하게 얘기해 주시니까 그 대출은 조금 덜 알아보셔도 되지 않을까라고 싶습니다. 두 번째 질문 좀 하겠습니다. 또 그 지금 현재 Thanks God for 비트코인 컨퍼런스라고 하는 게 또 미국 남부 내슈빌이나 이제 뭐 텍사스나 이런 데서 또 연사로 또 많이 나가고 계시고, 네, 이제 그런 무브먼트나 이제 컨퍼런스 자체가 이미 미국에는 좀 시작을 하고 있고, 최근에는 10대, 20대 젊은 청년들이 오히려 그 너무 워크이즘에 질려서 반대로 성경책을 읽고 하나님께로 돌아오는 약간 그런 분위기가 좀 형성이 되고 있다고 좀 알고 있는 와중인데, 지금 현재 미국의 크리스천 비트코이너들은 어떤 이제 그 문화가 지금 좀 이렇게 번지고 있는지, 그러니까 미국인들은 비트코인에 대한 이해도가 어느 정도인지, 크리스천 미국인들이 비트코인을 얼마만큼 수용하고 있는지에 대해서 조금 피부로 느끼는 현실을 조금 얘기해 주시면 너무 감사하겠습니다.
Yeah, you're asking about churches and Bitcoin and just young people turning to Christ, and how much about Bitcoin that they might know in church and so on. So I think the trend isn't just in Korea or in the U.S., it's worldwide. And I've been in a lot of these places. A lot of people are very curious about Christ. I was in Lugano back in October, and there was like a group of there were some Korean people there too, and saying hey or whatever. But there were also, I think, German Christians that came to the conference, and they wanted to meet me and say hi, because I'm the author of I'm one of the authors of Thank God for Bitcoin, and they were saying how there is a bit of a youth revival in Europe, particularly among young men, and I'm not exactly sure why it is, but this tends to be the case almost all over the world, that it's young men that are more coming to church, coming to Christ. Part of that, I think, is that they are kind of being discriminated against in many ways, particularly in the U.S. If you're a white man or an Asian man, it's very difficult to get into law firms or any kind of industry or whatever. You almost always have to start your own business. So they feel kind of rejected. They know the deck is kind of stacked against them. So they start asking questions. What is going on? How did we get here? And why am I at the bottom of the totem pole, and so on? And then they start reading, and they start because they have a gripe, right? They're complaining about something, but they usually end up thinking about truth and asking deeper questions, and then they eventually get to a point where they're like, okay, who is Christ, right? Like, what is this thing? And they oftentimes find atheism very cringy. They don't think it doesn't make any sense, and they think it's very embarrassing. So they're more predisposed to I guess, believe in Christ. So that's sort of like the macro trends that I've been seeing, is that generally young men are more coming to Christ. And of course, that completely overlaps with the Bitcoin demographic, right? It's almost all young men, right, that come towards Bitcoin. And so there's a lot of overlap. Now, as far as churches and what they're doing with Bitcoin and so on, there's a surprising number of them that are asking a lot of the same questions. And they usually come at it from a different angle. Usually, most of them realize that, first of all, no church has an active investment arm, right? Like, you don't have people trying to figure out what to do with all this money. Like, I'm sure many of you are in churches where they have, some money, and what do you do with it? Well, if you just leave it in fiat currency, it's melting constantly. So oftentimes, about the only way churches can invest in anything is land, right? And it's usually some sort of building. So that tends to be have been traditionally the only method of investment that they've had. Bitcoin's brought up some interesting questions. So they've started asking a lot of questions about the nature of money and what do we do with this money, right? Like, we want a building 20 years from now, but if we keep it now, it's going to be worth a fraction of what it actually is by the time we're ready for a building and so on. So they're thinking, okay, well, if we're going to invest, what do we invest in? What makes sense to invest in, and so on. And then somebody in the congregation will say, well, can we consider Bitcoin, and so on. And then they'll start having conversations and maybe pick up this book and so on. So that's different churches are at different points. I've noticed that a lot of pastors that are maybe younger, so say under 45, if you're a pastor under 45, they're significantly more open to Bitcoin than if you're over 45. And they start thinking about it in different ways. The one part that seems to be consistent is they almost always first think about it in terms of missions, right? Like, how do we get money to India? India has very strong restrictions around money transmission, particularly to churches and so on. So those sort of conversations tend to open the door to Bitcoin and then eventually get them. But I mean, like most churches, they're not necessarily technologically savvy, so it tends to take a while, but it is happening, at least as far as I can tell, to some degree.
미국은 지금 말씀하신 것처럼 이제 젊은 45세 이하의 좀 젊은 이제 그런 목회자분들이 많이 열려 있고, 그리고 이제 비트코인을 저축한다라고 하는 이제 그런 개념도 역시 지미송님이 열심히 설명 많이 하고 많이 알고 계시는 와중인데, 반면에 대한민국은 지금 대한민국의 현실은 교회에서 돈 얘기 자체를 못합니다. 네. 감히 불경하게 어디 감히 교회에서 돈 얘기를 하는가, 돈 얘기하지 맙시다 하는 거 첫 번째. 두 번째, 돈 얘기를 당연히 못하다 보니 비트코인의 빗자도 꺼내지를 못합니다, 얘기를. 네. 그래서 지금 저희 홀리시드 멤버들 중에서 교회에서 비트코인 얘기를 못하는 외로우신 분들이 같은 이제 홀리시드끼리 서로 얘기를 많이 나누고 있거든요. 그래서 그 교회 지도자분들이, 또 교회 다니고 계시는 기존의 크리스천 비트코이너 분들, 크리스천 분들이 한국에서는 특히 돈과 이제 비트코인에 대해서 굉장히 부정적인데, 이거를 어떻게 저희가 대처를 하고 이분들의 인식 개선을 어떻게 해야 될까라고 하는 게 제일 큰 이제 고민거리 중에 하나입니다.
Yeah, it's always awkward to bring up Bitcoin in church.
This is Holy Church.
Yeah, and I definitely get that. And even talking about money at church seems a little weird, and a lot of pastors avoid it because they don't want to come off as scammy, right? Like if you're up there asking for money or talking about money, people almost always think that you're a scammer of some kind, right? And there, at least in the U.S., there used to be these televangelists that would go on TV and ask for money, and then there'd be some scandal, and none of the pastors of normal churches wanted to be associated with that. So they did that by avoiding talking about money altogether. But the thing is, like, it's very hard to avoid if you're actually reading scripture, isn't it? Because if you read what Jesus actually said, something like 2/3 of everything that he talked about is money. Right? Money is what he talked about a lot, and for good reason. It's the half of every human transaction that you make, right? And so how to think about it, what to do about it. If you're not talking about that at church, where are you going to get talked about in like a reasonable way, like in a moral way? How are you going to understand what to do if you don't talk about it at church? So I would maybe try to guilt your pastors into talking more about it. I don't know if that works, but I mean this is an issue that is like just absolutely critical, right? It's something that Jesus talked about. Why aren't you talking about it, right? Like what if Jesus talked about it 2/3 of the time that he talked about it? Why aren't you talking about it 2/3 of the time, right? That should be something that should make sense for them. But unfortunately, a lot of pastors have egos and things like that, and maybe they're not open to it. I mean, the other way in which I've seen it sort of successfully talked about, and I don't know if this exists in Korea, but do you guys know who Dave Ramsey is? Dave Ramsey? Okay. Yeah. So he's a Christian guy, but his big thing in the U.S. at least is you have to get out of debt, and he has this program that a lot of churches in the U.S. run, where he helps people get out of debt, right? And this is through biblical principles and things like that. And oftentimes that's something that's run as like a small group where they'll help a whole bunch of people get out of debt together using scriptural principles. So that's one way in which sort of that topic of money gets brought up. It's too bad though, because Dave Ramsey hates Bitcoin and doesn't understand saving or investing. He just knows how to, he's very good at getting people out of debt. He's not so good at getting people to invest in the right thing or thinking correctly about money, at least past that. But yeah, those are two suggestions. I mean, it's very difficult to think, to do that, but I mean, the thing is, it's such a part of the modern world. I mean, you can't avoid things like inflation. Everybody feels inflation, and if you don't have a good explanation of how it happens, then what are you going to tell people? And unfortunately, a lot of pastors don't have the economic sophistication to be able to say anything about it. And if you've read the book Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis, this is one of the reasons why he says, this is why we need Christian economists. You can't just have pastors talking about everything. You need Christian economists talking about economics. You need Christian farmers talking about farming. You need Christian doctors talking about medicine. You can't just have the pastor talk about all of those things. That doesn't make sense. So I would suggest maybe if you are in a church, seeing if there are people interested in talking about like a biblical view of money, because there's plenty of scripture around just money. There's so much Jesus has said, so much in Proverbs, so much all over the place, right? What sound money is, just weights and scales, and you can even read like stuff like Isaiah. There's stuff about debasement of silver if you read closely. In Jeremiah, where your gold has become worthless. Why? Because it's about gold debasement, right? Like there's a lot of things in there that a lot of people kind of miss because they think it's just sort of like poetic language. It's actually there's a lot of things about money that you can understand better if you are studying it more closely. So I would suggest those things, and maybe you start here and then talk about it. But I think honestly, getting people out of debt is a very good program, and I think churches are a natural place where people can come. Even non-Christian people want to get out of debt, right? And figuring out like a good program to do that and restricting your impulsivity and things of that nature. Those are very good things, and I would say go that way as a maybe sort of like a side door into Bitcoin.
여러분 잘 들으셨습니까? 일단 성경에 말씀하신 것처럼 이제 댄스 커프 비트코인 책에도 나와 있지만 성경에서 예수님이 특히나 비유를 많이 드신 것 중에 하나가 돈과 관련된 비유를 되게 많이 드셨다. 그러니까 돈에 대해서 얘기하는 것 자체가 그렇게 불경한 게 아닌데 이제 그런 문화를 우리가 막 바꿔가는 것도 이제 우리의 노력 중에 하나다. 데나리우스, 금화, 아니면 두 랩돈 낸 과부 얘기 이런 게 다 있잖아요. 그리고 뭐 5달란트를 준 종한테 이제 뭐 5달란트, 뭐 3달란트, 1달란트 종들한테 주고서는 주인이 돌아오니까 뭐 그 1달란트 있던 종은 그냥 묻어놨다가 다시 꺼내오는 약간 그런 일화들이 좀 성경에 되게 많이 있죠. 이제 그런 내용들도 텍스트 오브 비트코인에 또 지미송님께서 좀 언급을 하셨었거든요. 그래서 돈 얘기를 굉장히 많이 하셨다, 비유로 성경에. 네, 그만큼 되게 중요한 거라는 걸 아시는데 이제 저희가 이제 아직까지 한국의 크리스천들은 돈을 대하는 태도가 좀 정리가 안 된 것 같아요. 네, 그 비트코인을 접하기 전에 그러니까 돈이라는 것 자체를 복음적으로 성경적으로 어떻게 바라봐야 되는가에 대해서 좀 교회에서 조금 제대로 가르쳐지지 않는 약간 그런 부분이 좀 있는데.
Yeah. It's exactly like Christianity. Before you understand Christ, you have to understand the problem first. That you are a sinner, and that you are not a good person. That you need to repent, and you need somebody to redeem you, right? And with Bitcoin, you're not going to understand that until you understand that the current system is massively broken. And that the system of money we have is one of theft. And until that is a clear reality for people, they're not going to see the need for Bitcoin. For them, it's going to be a plaything, a gambling thing. And this is all a part of the education that I think you guys can do a good job in, spreading, right? Because it is a big part of people's lives, whether they admit it or not. And if you can explain to them, it is the system of money that is corrupt, that is causing a lot of these problems all over the world, and that a return to a sound money, right, even at a personal level, is a very good thing.
일단 지미송님이라고 하는 이런 진짜 어떻게 보면 크리스찬이자 비트코이너인 되게 아이코닉한 분이 계시다는 것만으로도 이제 미국이 되게 진짜 God bless 아메리카. 네. 미국 부럽다. 네, 한국에도 이제 지미송님 같은 이제 그런 분들이 좀 많이 좀 생기셨으면 하는 바람에 또 홀리시드가 또 있는 존재 이유라고 또 생각 중에 합니다. 네, 그리고 마지막으로 지금 저희가 준비한 질문하고 현장에 계신 분들 질문 또 좀 받도록 하겠습니다. 마지막 저희가 미리 준비한 질문은 저희 홀리시드라고 하는 저희 좀 어떻게 보면 소규모 그룹인데 이제 지금 저희가 드린 이런 질문들을 하나씩 저희 모임 몇몇 안 되는 사람들이 우리부터 시작을 하자라고 하면서 각자가 이제 정말 복음과 비트코인을 어떻게 하면 더 정확하게 제대로 본질적인 걸 전달할 수 있을까라고 같이 고민하는 사람들의 모임이라고 봅니다. 네. 그랬을 때 저희가 지금 지미송님 컨퍼런스 영상이나 뭐 책 읽고 책 리뷰하고 또 이벤트하고 하는 이제 그런 행동들 먼저 시작을 했는데 이제 그거 이외에 지금 이제 시작이긴 하지만 앞으로 좀 어떤 방향으로 나아가면 좋을지 같은 이제 좀 선배로서 복음과 비트코인의 이 여정을 먼저 걸어오신 선배로서 홀리시드가 한국의 비트코이너 크리스찬들이 좀 어떻게 성장했으면 좋겠는가 하는 좀 조언 좀 부탁드리겠습니다.
Well, I'm going to play the pastor here. Have you prayed about this? Honestly, I think that's the first place you should go. Why aren't you asking God? Why are you asking me? Right? But I mean, if you want to ask me, I think you should pray. Yeah, that's where I'll start. But more practically speaking, the other thing to do is to grow in your faith. Understand this stuff better and talk to people. Right? Talk to other Christians. Talk to other Bitcoiners. Talk to them about what their concerns are. The thing that I find about sort of public interaction and interaction between individuals, really, it tends to be very artificial in a fiat setting. You don't really need other people when you can infinitely print money, essentially, and be covered in all cases of, things going terribly bad or something like that, right? You get bailed out in many different ways through fiat money. Under sound money, you're forced to have closer relationships and you depend on people a lot more. Now, this is much more the case in the U.S. where there are all kinds of safeguards and fiat money protection, and it gets less and less the further away from sort of the fiat money printing towards the edges of the monetary regime or whatever. What I would suggest is that as you get more into a sound money mindset, more into a Bitcoin mindset, that you invest a lot more into your relationships, because that's where you're supposed to be. I think that's God's design, right? Instead of depending on some centralized entity like the king that we talked about earlier, depend on God and in the community that you have and in the people that He's provided in your life. And I think that's the direction in general that Christianity has always, sort of spread through. It was never sort of like Islam, which conquered entire territories and said, now you're Muslim, right? It was never that way. It was always a one person at a time thing, and it was always done on a relationship level. And I would encourage you to do the same, right? Invite people, right? If you have Christian friends, invite them to here. If you have Bitcoin friends, invite them to here. Start small. And you don't. I don't want to make it sound like you have to go be, doing evangelism all day long and, going out into the street corner like some of the people and being like, oh, you're going to hell unless you, convert right now. Nothing like that. In fact, I would encourage you to be, just take tiny steps of faith, right? Like this is the Christian model. You don't have to do very much. And this is the thing that I found surprising about where my role has become in the Bitcoin sort of Christian community. I really didn't do that much, right? All I said to my friends was, hey, I'm a Christian, or, just mention that I went to church on Sunday or whatever. And later on, when they're starting to study this stuff, they would seek me out. And similarly, I would tell all my church, I work in Bitcoin, I do this or whatever. And then when they get curious about Bitcoin, they come and ask me about Bitcoin, right? You don't have to be the only source of information for your friends. You just need to be in a relationship so that they know who to contact when the time comes. And that time might come tomorrow, it might come 10 years from now. But be ready, right? This is what this is what Paul said, right? Like always be ready to give a reason for your hope and your faith. And that's where you want to be, is in that mode of preparation. Work on your relationships, be prepared to answer those questions. But you don't have to force anything.
다 같이 아멘. 아멘. 정말 많은 걸 할 필요 없다. 너무 거창하게 우리 큰 거 합시다. 그게 아니라 지금 있는 자리에서 내가 정체성이 명확하면 나 크리스천이야. 그리고 나 비트코이너야. 라고 한 정체성이 명확하면 주변에 있는 사람들 중에서 관심 있어 하는 분들이 알아서 나한테 와서 물어볼 거다. 관계를 유지를 잘 하라. 정말 이제 네트워크나 커뮤니티나 이제 이런 릴레이션십이 정말 이 작은 게 어떻게 보면 제일 큰 일이다. 그래서 항상 이제 성경에도 나오시잖아요. 말씀하시잖아요. 전도에 미련한 것으로 이제 복음을 듣게 된다고 하시는 것처럼, 그러니까 별거 아닌데 지금 내 자신 한 사람 한 사람이 딱 약간 어떻게 보면은 이 비트코인과 복음의 딱 약간 망대 같은 등대 같은 역할을 하면서 빛을 비추고 있으면 알아서들 필요하신 분이 찾아오실 거다. 그런 친구들한테 그냥 편안하게 대화 나누듯이 궁금하면 질문하고 답해주고 그러면서 서로 성장해 나가면 된다. 이제 그런 말씀이셨습니다. 오빠 너무 감사합니다. 네, 지금 박수 한번 부탁드립니다. 지금 질문 4가지는 저희 홀리시드 내에서 질문을 미리 취합해서 이제 미리 좀 드렸던 질문이고요. 지금 현장에서도 질문을 좀 더 받아보도록 하겠습니다. 질문 있으신 분? 네, 이제 번쩍, BTC 오프님, 네.
Alright, first of all, thank you for coming to the BTC House Origin, and my nickname is BTC Hope here. And before I was know about Bitcoin, I was in fiat trap. I was just earn money and spend unnecessary things, and I was consistently research about an investment and extra. But once I find out that the Bitcoin standard by Saifin and Amos, and it completely shift from the fiat mindset to Bitcoin. Do you know why money effect for everything? Thank you.
Yeah, so hopefully you guys got what he asked over there. Anyway, the question is really more about, I guess, your personal experience of getting into Bitcoin and then noticing a whole bunch of changes. What happened is really the question. And I'm not sure I have a great answer, other than that the alignment of what Safety would call time preference, right? Where you start having low time preference, what I guess biblically you would call prudence. It changes the way you look at each decision. And really, like, what is life other than a whole bunch of decisions that you have to make, right? And actions that you're doing. And, you know, in a subtle way, all those little decisions kind of add up and change, you know, how you change your entire life. You have just like a few habits that are good. They tend to compound over time. And next thing you know, like 5 years later, you're saying to yourself, wow, my life has changed completely. So I don't know if I have a great answer for why sort of turning away from fiat into Bitcoin changes people so drastically, especially over a sufficient amount of time. But it is something that I've observed for a long time. And your story is not uncommon. I've had a lot of different acquaintances, friends, students, mentors, you know, they've all come through Bitcoin and said, like, you know, before I was, you know, paycheck to paycheck and, you know, spending on stupid things, and then now I'm saving, right? Now I have a goal, I have a future, and I have something to look forward to, and I'm doing it as hard as I can, as fast as I can, and so on. It must tap into something, or you're sort of like broken out of a spell or something like that, right? Like we're all sort of hypnotized into like a fiat mindset, and then that spell breaks once you discover Bitcoin, something to that degree. But yeah, I'm not sure exactly the mechanism. I just know that it does happen.
So thanks for coming to Korea, and I just wanna say it's a kind of good report in church that my church is actually talking about the money a lot, and every sermon we have like a 10 or 15 minutes to talk about the money. So like you said, my pastor also told us that like 2/3 of the Bible is talking about the money in the Jesus script. So I try to learn the concept of the money from the church, and I work at the financial industry, so I also learn from that side. So they seems really parallel, but I thought that the Bitcoin could be a solution, but still, for me, it's not clear. So like you said, we should not have some kind of debt to make investments in terms of the Bitcoin, like a 집합이사. No, I understand that you don't suggest us to do the 집합이사, right? But I think your perspective is, in my opinion, so your perspective of the Bitcoin is like a saving Bitcoin. But we thought that it's as making an investment in Bitcoin. So in terms of the investments, the making that is a kind of easy way to maximize the profit. I mean, you're saying about the saving the money as a Bitcoin is really good idea, but how do you think of the investment as a Bitcoin to use?
Yeah, that we're kind of getting into the other talk that I have ready for the main audience. So, but let me. So I don't want to spoil that for you guys. But the main thing is that there are sort of stages to Bitcoin ownership, right? And I think it often starts as an investment. Let's just see what happens and so on. But as you hold it, as you watch it, as you learn to trust it a little more and trust in your analysis of the money, the economic system, and how everything works, you become more convinced of it. And that's normal. So, you know, they say, come for the number, go up, you know, leave with life change, something like that. Like that's a common experience of a lot of Bitcoiners, is that they do that. But I mean, it sounds like you're maybe in an earlier part of the journey, and investment is perfectly fine, right? But just watch it, study it. I think in general, if you own a little bit of it, you're going to be a lot more motivated to learn about it. I know it certainly was for me and a lot of the friends that I have. A lot of us got into Austrian economics much more than we would have just because we had Bitcoin. And it was like, okay, what is this thing? Can I trust it? What's the basis and so on? So it's normal, and I would say that study it a little more. It's fine to think of it as an investment, definitely at first, but there's the rabbit hole, as they say, is very deep.
안녕하세요. 저는 그 비트백이라고 비트코인 리워드 서비스를 하고 있는 스타트업 대표인데요. 그 미국에는 이런 스타트업 그 리워드 서비스가 많이 있는 걸로 알고 있어요. 그런 뭐 롤리나 아니면 폴드 같은 그런 앱 서비스가 한국에 없어서, 그래서 이제 쇼핑을 하거나 여행을 갔을 때 비트코인을 리워드 받을 수 있는 서비스를 이제 한국에서 출시하려고 하는데, 혹시 이런 장기적으로 이제 비트코인, 이게 제가 하려는 이런 서비스가 장기적으로 비트코인 채택을 늘리는데 좀 도움이 되는 건지 좀 궁금하기도 하고, 솔직히 지미송은 이런 비트코인 씬에서 여러 스타트업들을 많이 봤을 거잖아요. 근데 제가 혹시 놓치고 있는 부분이 있는지, 그리고 이런 비트코인 스타트업들이 망하는 이유, 약간 잘 안 되는 이유가 어떤 건지 좀 그런 통찰력을 궁금합니다.
Generally wants to
Yeah,
advise as
yeah.
a startup founder.
Yeah, and the pitfalls of Bitcoin startups and so on.
So it's pretty similar with Lowly and Falls.
Yeah. So like a reward kind of thing. Yeah, I get it. And yeah, it's hard to say exactly what causes all the Bitcoin startups to fail, but I know in general a lot of reasons why startups fail. One, I think the number one reason is like the founders don't get along. they have like a conflicting vision or something like that. Another one is they overhire and then they spend too much money. They don't find product market fit. They run out of money. Lots of things like that. Those are completely normal. In the Bitcoin space, oftentimes they get caught they raise during the euphoria of a bull market, and then by the time the bear market comes, they find that they didn't have anything. A lot of mining startups, for example, will start thinking, okay, well, the Bitcoin price has gone up this much. It's like super profitable, so let's go get into it right now. By the time the equipment arrives, it's like already too late, and they go bust pretty quickly. So I would say most of those are along the lines of not enough long-term planning, not enough thinking about that. But I mean, I think for you, the big one is product market fit, right? Like that's the number one thing in any startup. If you don't have customers, you're not going to make any money. So go figure out what problems people have that they're willing to pay for, and then go solve that solution for them. Now, it might not even involve Bitcoin, right? But those are the solutions that I found actually end up providing value to people. One of the startups that I was at for a long time was Athena Health, and it's now a public company and so on. But the way it started was as an OB-GYN clinic. So there were a whole bunch of them that the two founders actually bought, and they tried to make it profitable and so on. And then they ran into all of these billing problems, right? Like, how do we get the insurance company to pay and so on? And then they solved it using software. And they knew they had something when every other OB-GYN clinic in the area wanted the same software. They were like, how are you getting paid this much? Go get us this software. And then they built off of that. So oftentimes the product market fit doesn't necessarily come from what your preconceived notions might be. It comes from almost like serendipity. I don't even know if there's a word for that in Korean. I guess I'll find out if you guys get confused looking at the TV screen. But but yeah, it comes almost by accident, and that's what you have to kind of watch out for. Oftentimes, a lot of startups fail because they think they have one vision of how things are supposed to be, and they find out that that's not it, and they don't pivot away from it quick enough. You have to be willing to listen to the customer and say, okay, what is the problem I'm solving? What is the pain point that you have? And if you can't identify that, for something that they want solved, that they're willing to pay money for, then you don't have a product. You need a product. That would be my suggestion. Yeah.
최근에 이제 그 코페이라고 혹시 들어보셨나요? 네, 코페이가 이제 코페이 호프님이 이제 그 쿠팡이나 뭐 지금 최근에 어저께는 이제 오늘의 집까지 연동을 하셔가지고 거기서 구매를 하시면 리워드 포인트를 이제 사토시로 적립을 하는 이제 서비스를 이제 테스트로 좀 돌리고 계시는데 굉장히 좀 호응이 좋거든요. 네, 아마 그런 것도 많이 좀 참고해 보시면은 좋지 않을까 싶습니다. 네. 또 그 저희가 뭐 벌써 너무 시간이 금방 갑니다. 벌써 1시간이 돼가지고 네. 그리고 저기 마지막으로 또 같이 자리해주신 이제 백훈종님, 이제 당신은 왜 부자가 되지 못하는가 요 책 좀 번역하시면서 좀 그 소감이나 아니면 좀 지미송님 이 책 그 번역하시면서 좀 약간 기억에 남는 일이 있다고 하면 좀 한 가지 좀 말씀 부탁드리겠습니다.
일단 너무 번역하기 어려웠다는 게 첫 번째 소감이고요.
아니 너무 단어가 어려워요. 이게 처음에 딱 목에 탁 걸린 게 지대추구가 뭐지? 막 이러면서 단어부터가 좀 걸려가지고.
네, 진짜 너무 단어가 어려웠고 그래서 내용이 어렵고 단어가 어렵다 보니까 번역하기 너무 어려웠고 제가 딱 챗GPT가 나오기 전에 이거를 시작을 해서 아무 AI의 도움도 받지 못했어요. 근데 그래서 한 거의 1년, 한 10개월 정도 걸린 것 같은데 두 번째로 드는 소감, 번역할 때 들었던 소감은 너무 극단적이다라는 생각을 좀 했었어요.
어떤 면에서?
그러니까 모든 문제가 진짜 피아트 때문이라고 쓰는 책이니까 읽으면서 좀 공감이 안 가고 너무 극단적이라고 생각했던 부분도 있었어요. 대표적으로 생각나는 거는 뭐 예를 들어 대학교, 교육, 뭐 그다음에 미술 얘기도 나오는데 앤디 워홀 같은 사람들의 현대 미술 같은 것도 너무 싫어하더라고요. 그러니까 이런 게 다 이제 좀 퍼스널한 그런 게 있지만 개인 취향이 있지만 저는 또 다른 생각을 했었으니까. 근데 번역을 하면서 그리고 읽으면서 계속해서 공감이 되더라고요, 결국. 어떤 그 root cause of everything, every problem에 대해서 얘기를 하는 책이니까 피아트가 결국 이유구나라는 걸 이해하면은 모든 부분이 다 공감이 되더라고요, 결국엔. 그래서 참 좋은 저의 비트코인의 레비톨에 더 들어갈 수 있게 만들어준 경험이었습니다.
다 같이 박수 한번 부탁드립니다. 그 지미송님 좀 마무리하기 전에 좀 지미송님이 좀 오늘 여기 오신 분들한테 하고 싶은 말 좀 짧게 좀 한마디 부탁드리겠습니다.
Yeah. Well, so first of all, thank you for being here, and thank you for being Bitcoiners and Christians, right? It's a smaller community, and I'm always encouraged by those stories about people that are in this sort of small intersection in a Venn diagram. I feel like I can talk about certain things with Bitcoiner Christians that I can't talk about with either Christians or Bitcoiners because there's some knowledge that's missing in that. In either of those categories that I can talk about with Bitcoin Christians. So I'm appreciative that you get to be my audience because I can talk about stuff like centralized and decentralized Israel and which is God's purpose and things like that. But yeah, I would love to see more of these communities all over the world. It's great to see, and thank you so much. You're an encouragement to me.